Hey guys, welcome back to releasethecraftin and Priscilla. This is me. I'm here to do another episode of Storycraft. Storycraft is where I tell you guys a story and I do a craft. And this time I'm doing a craft to use up all my little scrappy bits of trim and like sari silk and fibers that I've just been hoarding in the bags after I finish a project. I'm showing you guys a thing, a craft. I'm making a jewelry piece, but you could actually turn these into like little frames for the front of your journal covers if you're not into jewelry making. It's a great way to use up like all your little charm beads and scrappy bits. Here we are. That's what we're doing. And I'm also going to tell you guys a story. I'm telling you guys a story today of the Frog Prince because it came up into my cultural zeitgeist. It came up on some of my YouTube stuff that I was watching, and I had feelings about the movie and went on a whole rant that I shared over on Patreon on my little podcast there. So I thought I would tell you guys the tale to sort of tie it all together, and let's jump into how crazy this story is, because it's gonna be a weird one, you guys. It's not super weird. It's not the weirdest story I've told, but it's interesting. I'll let you guys decide. So our story, of course, begins in the way, way long ago, and it stars a beautiful young princess. Now, she doesn't have a name, and she doesn't have an age, so we're going to assume that the princess is of legal, marriable age. No questions asked. Now, for entertainment, the princess had a golden ball, and this ball was very special to her. She loved to play with it, so because she's like a girly girl, but also very practical, she makes sure that her hair is tied down with a bonnet and that she has practical shoes on before she goes outside. And she takes her ball with her, and her like joy in life, the thing that she loves to do the most, is to toss the ball up in the air and then catch it. And she likes to challenge herself by tossing it up higher and higher and higher and trying to catch it then. They didn't have Netflix, so she made do. This was her main entertainment. She loved this ball. Everyone knew that the gold ball was the princess's special ball. She loved it so much. And so, one day when she is out there playing, having a great time with her ball as a fully grown, adult, legal, marriable, aged woman, out there, she's playing with her ball, and she tosses it up, and she catches it, and then she tosses it again, and she catches it, and she tosses it a third time, but this time she tossed it a little bit too high, like higher than she had ever tossed it before, and she doesn't manage to catch it. In fact, it just slips from her grasp and starts to bounce away. So she starts to chase after it, but this ball is like cooking. It's moving away at quite a speed, so she's not quite able to keep up with it, but she can still see it ahead of her, and it ends up rolling out of the palace grounds into the woods, and it continues to go on its merry way as if possessed. It's not, but as if. And it rolls all the way into a little stream where she watches it go under the water and sink down to the bottom. So she gets to the stream and she looks inside, and she can see through the clear water. It's very clear water. She can see her ball down there shining in the briny deep, so to speak, because it's a little bit too far for her to stick her hand in and fetch it out. And she's a princess, so of course she doesn't want to like get wet or dirty more than she has to. So then she starts to cry, like absolutely sob, because this was her favorite thing, and now it is gone, lost to the depths of this stream. It's a stream. The story specifically says. And as she's crying and like basically being like, my ball is lost forever, and having a whole like tirade about it, a little frog like pokes his head up above the surface of the water, and he's like, hey, what's the matter? And she goes, my ball, it's gone so far into the stream, I'll never be able to get it back. And he's like, oh, well, I could get it for you if you would do something for me, which, like, conditional. I don't like that, frog, but this is the circumstances we're in. So the princess is like, this is the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. First of all, this frog is talking, and second of all, there's no way this frog is going to be able to lift my ball and carry it all the way out of the stream. That's impossible. So she's like, well, what do you want? And the little frog is like, what I would like is for you to take me home with you, let me eat from your plate and sleep on your pillow and just be my friend. And like, really close to me. In fact, I would just like it if you loved me. And she's like, yeah, totally. I would definitely do that if in the most impossible set of circumstances you could fetch my ball for me, which, like, in her brain, she's thinking this is impossible. It's never going to happen. But she agrees to it. So she's like, yes, I'll give you what you desire. I don't know about love. That's a very strong word, but what you desire, sure, if you bring me my ball back, because I really desperately want it back, and I honestly would kind of give anything to have it back. It's my only form of entertainment. It's a very, very long time ago. And the frog is like, all right, no problem. So its head goes back underneath the water, and she watches it do its little froggy kick swim all the way down to the bottom of the stream, which is apparently more than an arm's length deep. And I feel like maybe she could have just waited in there, but, you know, princesses got a princess. So the frog gets to the bottom, and it manages to do it. It manages to scoop up her ball and carry it back up to the surface, which you might be wondering, what's this ball made of? Because it just sunk to the bottom of the stream. It didn't just float away like we would all assume like a bouncy ball would do, because they're full of air. But apparently that's not the case. This ball was made of wood or something. And not even buoyant wood, like petrified, fossilized wood, and it sunk to the bottom. But the frog carries it back up, and it, you know, it nudges the ball back towards her on the edge of the stream, so she picks it up, and what does our princess do? She snatches that ball off, and she runs, like full pelt runs. This is why she wore the sensible shoes, you guys. She runs. She turns into like an outline of herself, cartoon style, and takes off running, and the frog is like, oh wait, I would love if you brought me with you, but she's actually already gone. She doesn't even hear the frog calling out to her. And so she goes home, and she goes back inside, and she's like, oh my god, that was such a stressful adventure. I'm gonna go about my business and take a little break, do a little like little yoga, have like a little drink, a little coffee, a little self-care, a little treat for all the pain and tribulations I've gone through. And she does. She absolutely takes care of herself, and by the time dinner comes around, she has forgotten entirely about this frog. She didn't give any fucks about this frog, you guys, and she's just chomping away at her dinner merrily, thinking about how she's going to go out tomorrow and play with her ball again. And then she hears this little, like, tip splash sound. And it goes tip splash, tip splash, tip splash. And she's like, what the heck is that? And then she hears a little tap, tap, tap on the door. Tiny little tap. And even the king is like, is that somebody at the door? So for whatever reason, the princess gets up and answers the door. They don't have servants to do this or something. She's not that kind of princess, I guess. But she goes and she answers the door, and who's at the door, you guys? You already know. You know how the story goes. It's the frog. And the frog's there, and he's like, oh my god, it took me all day to get here. You don't even believe how far my stream is from your castle. And she's like, ugh, gross, disgusting. And she shuts the door. She goes and sits down again, and the king's like, who was at the door, sweetheart? And she goes, oh, it's this frog. He got my ball back for me, and I told him that I would be his friend and let him eat from my plate and sleep on my bed, on my pillow, if he did that for me. I kind of made that promise, but, like, gross. Frogs are disgusting. And the king, is like, you made a promise, and you're not going to keep it? Not in my house. So he tells her she has to get back up, let that frog inside, keep her promises, because they can't be royalty. They can't call themselves royalty if they can't even keep their words to the lowliest of their subjects. So she stomps back over there because she's like, I can't believe that we are giving this frog preferential treatment. It's a freaking frog. She opens the door, and she's like, come on in, frog. And the frog's like, oh, there you are, my beloved. I have been waiting for you. I wanted to tell you about the journey from my stream to this castle. She's like, I literally don't care. And she goes and she sits down. And then there it is, that tip splash, tip splash. It is the sound of the frog hopping his way along until he gets to her chair. And he's like, hey, could you pick me up and put me on the chair, my love, because I can't really get there. I'm a frog. Although, like, if you've seen a frog could definitely climb a chair, you guys. That's not a problem. That was just a flex on his part for sure. And so she reaches down, she picks up the frog, she puts him on the chair next to her, and he's like, oh, we're so far apart, though. We're so far apart. Could I be closer to you? So she scoots the chair closer to her, and this whole time she's just, like, glaring at her dad, like, I can't believe you're making me do this. This is unbelievable. And As she slides the chair closer to her, the frog's like, oh, but your plate, you said you would let me eat from your plate, and it's just so far, and I'm just a little guy. I'm just a frog. So she's like, oh my god, you were so needy. So she shoves her plate over, so now the frog can eat from her plate, and this completely grosses her out, as it would anyone, I think, with rationality and a sense of how germs work. And the frog eats until he's full, and he's like, oh my god, I'm so full. Darling, can you take me up to our room? I would love to take a nap, go to bed for the night. I'm just so full of food. And she's like, stop calling me darling, and I will take you. And through gritted teeth, she picks up the frog, despite how it's giving her the heebie-jeebies with its slimy skin. She looks at her dad one more time, another pointed look, and she stomps upstairs. And then she goes to put the frog on her bed, and she's like, here, go to bed. And he's like, oh, but I want to sleep on your pillow. And she's like, I only have 2. And those are for me, the princess. And he's like, yeah, but one of those is for me because you promised. And since you and I are in love, clearly you will let me sleep on your pillow. And so she's like, okay, fine, you can sleep on the pillow. And so she goes to bed with this frog on her pillow. And in the morning, she gets up, and the frog gets up too, and he hops right on out the door, right on out the front door of the castle, and goes back to the woods. And she's like, oh, thank God, it's over. The whole thing is over. I kept my promise. The whole thing is over. Turns out, when dinner comes around again, there's a little tip splash, another tapping at the door. She opens it, and there's the frog, and he's like, my beloved, you will never believe the day that I've had. Let me tell you all about it. And she's like, no, save it. I hate it. I don't want to hear about anything frogs do. And she picks him up, stomps back over to her chair, puts him back in the seat, looks at her dad, and she's like mouthing to him like, how long does this have to go on? I don't understand. And her dad's like, a promise is a promise. And if I have any personality, it's that I make everyone keep every promise they have ever made, even to a freaking frog. And the same thing happens again. The frog eats from her plate, then he's like, oh, I'm suddenly so tired. Can you carry me to my room, my love? And she's just like, it's not your room, it's mine. And he's like, our room then, whichever one. And she's like, no, it's still mine. Also, I wasn't done eating, and I don't want to go to bed. And the frog's like, oh, but I'm so tired, my love, my darling, my angel. If you would just carry me to our room. And she's like, oh my god, this frog is so annoying. It's not even that I'm being a jerk. This frog is a jerk. So she carries the frog back up there. He insists on sleeping on the pillow, and she's like, fine, okay, fine. So then, in the morning of the second day, it happens again. He leaves, and she's like, please, let this be the end of it. Please let this be the end of it. No, it's not the end of it. On the third day, the frog shows up again, and he's like, hey, plate, chair, bed, let's do it all over again, one more time. And she takes him upstairs, she puts him on the pillow, and he's like, isn't this so nice? Like, this is just so great. Like, we're like lovers, we're so close, we're so intimate. And she's like, you are a pest. You are absolutely a pest. And he's like, no, my darling, if you would just, like, bear with me, things will turn out great. You don't even know. And so, after listening to his ramble rant and how everything is going to be so like peaches and cream if she would just accept how things are, she picks him up. She picks up the little frog, and she's like, you know what? I'm actually totally done with you. You are the most annoying creature I've ever met. You got my ball back for me. You don't, like, need to move in. You are not entitled to my life. And so she chucks the frog at the wall, and he goes splat. And then she gets in the bed. She rolls over. She goes to sleep, thinking she killed the frog. Now in the morning she wakes up, and guess what's next to her? In the bed. It's not a frog. No, it's a fully grown adult man. It's a fully grown adult man, which arguably more terrifying than waking up next to a frog. And he's like, oh my gosh, my darling, you did it. You broke my curse. A spiteful fairy cursed me and turned me into a frog. And I could only have the curse broken if a princess would allow me to eat from her plate and sleep on her pillow for 3 days. And you did. You did just that. And she's like, I feel like I maybe murdered you. But he's kind of stupidly attractive, like really attractive, that she's kind of a little bit willing to look past all of his flaws and his incessant neediness and his pestering, to the point where after a short conversation, he's like, I am in fact a prince from a very wealthy kingdom. A kingdom with servants who answer the door, actually. And now that I have returned to my human princely form, I would love nothing more than to take you to my kingdom, marry you, and just spend the rest of my days letting you dote on me, because that is my favorite thing, obviously. He doesn't say that last part. I added that in. But she goes, you know what? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think I'm down. You're kind of ridiculously good looking, and I'm beginning to realize that I might also be kind of a bad person, and I think we maybe belong together with our toxicity. And he's like, you're right. See, yeah, my toxicity matches your toxicity. We're meant to be together. This isn't an unhealthy attachment style whatsoever. And he does just that. He goes downstairs. They go together, of course. They tell the king, like, hey, I'm taking your daughter. We're going to another kingdom and getting married and living there for the rest of our days. And the king's like, all right, have a good time. Glad you kept your promise, aren't you? And she's like, shut up, Dad. And they fuck off into the sunset. They don't fuck off into this. That's such a crude way to end the story. They live happily ever after. The end. That is the end of the story. There is a little bit about the story. Another name for the Frog Prince is Iron Henry, and essentially Henry has no role in the story until the very end. Henry is the name of the prince's loyal servant who was so distraught that his master got turned into a frog that his heart literally starts to break, literally. So to solve that problem, he gets 3 iron bands wrapped around his heart. I don't know if that's an internal or external surgery. I don't know, but he gets 3 iron bands wrapped around him to keep his heart together so that it doesn't fall apart while his master is enduring the punishment of being a slimy frog. And as soon as the prince turns back into a human, he suddenly finds out he has a spidey sense about frogs, and he goes to pick him up in his carriage. And it's a beautiful, brilliant carriage that displays how wealthy the prince actually is, because it's drawn by 8 horses and it's ornate and all the things. And when he gets there, excuse me, sorry, so unprofessional. When he gets there, he sees that his master has turned back into a human. The bands fall off and his heart is restored, and he doesn't die, and then he just drives them away to the prince's kingdom. And that's the end of Iron Henry and his entire contribution to the story. So I didn't really feel like it was relevant information in my version of the story, but it does exist in the story, and it is a reason why they call the Frog Prince Iron Henry, which is a cool name for a character that you thought would be a lot more cooler and more interesting and maybe involved, but really is just sort of a bit of I don't know, narrative fuckery to be see how much this guy loves the prince. He's really not an obnoxious pest after all, which I would argue he's probably worse to Iron Henry than he was to the princess. But yeah, this story is bananas to me. For one, the version that you guys were probably expecting is the one where she kisses the frog and he turns back into a human. But actually, this story comes to us from the Brothers Grimm. They published it in their first book. It was the first story. So traditionally, in anthologies, the Frog Prince is the first story that they print, typically because it was the first story in their collection of fairy tales in the original run. But it comes from 1812, I think is what I read. If I'm remembering years correctly. Don't fact check me, it's fine. But there's some indication that the story is a little bit older, and there's a little tiny bit of evidence that I found on Wikipedia that states that the story might even be as old as ancient Roman times, specifically at the age of Nero, because people used to joke about him being a frog, and there's a parallel to him being the Frog Prince, and him being the frog in the story, but the prince actually being a totally separate character in that version of the story. But there's nothing concrete that says that this is definitely an older version of the Frog Prince. It just might be a story that the Frog Prince evolved from. But the rendition, the version of the story where she kisses the frog and he becomes a prince is actually a later edition from when the Grimm's Brothers story made it over to England. England was like, what if she kissed the frog? I'm just going to leave that on the table because that's what they decided. That was what they added to the story. And that's where the common version or idea of this story comes into play, where you kiss a frog and turn him into a handsome prince. That's where that comes from. It's actually not in the original tale. And this tale is specifically a German fairy tale. Even the oldest written version of it they could find was like 1806, and that was also a German fairy tale, and it's thought to have been a German fairy tale for a very long time. So, interesting. It is mentioned that the princess's sensible shoes are actually clogs, but I couldn't imagine clogs being sensible shoes, and sensible shoes was funnier, so that is another just interesting little factoid. I think both characters in this story are despicable people. I think it might be obvious, because I think the princess is a little bit weird and also a little bit spoiled, but I don't blame her for being disgusted by a frog. Not that I think frogs are disgusting, but like, I don't want to handle a frog. You know what I mean? Like, I like to look at them. I don't want to touch them. But also, like, I think the frog is so persistent and, like, pestering of her that I'm like, well, yeah, I would be, like, mad and throw that frog, too. Because, like, dude, take a clue. Like, take a hint. I don't care how far you traveled here. I didn't want anything to do with you. But to hold her to this standard, specifically so that he can get his curse reversed, is understandable. But at the same time, I'm like, okay, so you got her to reverse your curse. Leave her alone. Just let her and her ball live in peace. She doesn't have to marry you, but for whatever reason, it had to end in a happier ending than just like him being like, thanks for helping me get out of my curse. I'm gonna leave and never bother you again, which to me is the happiest of endings. They had to get married, which to me is the most tragic of endings, because it's two shitty people being shitty together for the rest of their lives, because I can't imagine that, they did anything positive afterwards, but that's just my take on this story. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. I did not think this was going to be as long as it is. It's a very short story, but, you know, I'm nothing if not a consistent yapper. So, yeah, that's going to be it for me, you guys. I will catch you all in the next one, and until then, I appreciate your faces, and happy crafting. Bye!